I am truly honored to receive the prize from Kate McIntosh herself and for her generosity to accept to be here and to introduce me. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kate. It is, of course, also a huge honor to receive a prize that is named after Jane Drew, whose work allows us to celebrate women in architecture and connect them to innovation, diversity, and inclusiveness. I recall being asked to introduce Zaha Hadid 10 years ago when she was receiving this award, and it is that event that made me think very hard about the power of women in architecture. Debates about women in architecture are usually trying to achieve equilibrium between men and women architects. I think this equilibrium can be a source for innovation, and we women butt up against it day to day and can use it, harness it for achieving better work. I still find the notion of becoming woman by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari a very useful gender idea. They define being man as opposed to being woman, and then there is the notion of becoming woman. Whereas being man is the status quo, and being woman suggests rebellion against being man. Becoming woman is a process of ignoring the status quo and opening up to processes that take you somewhere different, creating difference, in this case, in architecture. Now, the significance of becoming woman is that it's a gender-neutral idea, and it can be embraced by men and women alike, and it can be pursued either by working differently or working in a different way or achieving different kinds of spaces. But it is, as I mentioned, an inclusive concept that can be embraced by anyone who can see the power in any form of minority, be it gender, race, class, sexuality, or disability. A wonderful historical example of women deciding to ignore the status quo is, of course, the Matrix Design Cooperative that was set up in 1981 here in London. They formed a completely different way of working. They were a cooperative, non-hierarchical, and they were very interested in including their end users of their projects in their design processes. A more recent example of ignoring the status quo is the new architecture, the setting up of the new architecture writers by Finn Harper and Tom Wilkinson with the support of the Architecture Review and the Architecture Foundation. When Finn asked me to join the board of the new architecture writers, I should say that their mission is to focus on people of color who are underrepresented across design, journalism, and curation. When Finn asked me to join the board, I must admit I was excited not because of the fact that it was going to achieve better balance between majority writers and minorities, but because of its potential to create new voices and new perspectives on architecture. The great potential of new architecture writers is to normalize the association of minorities with creativity, not in addressing representation or underrepresentation. It already shows that interesting things happen when things are not in equilibrium. It makes you think differently, act differently, set up these initiatives. Deleuze and Guattari argue that the minor can be anyone with the ability or power to create other gestures, extraordinariness, in thinking differently. And in this sense, I think Finn Harper and Tom Wilkinson, by setting up new architecture writers, have chosen to be a minority themselves in championing those voices that were previously unheard. So becoming minoritorian, which includes becoming woman, is an ethical question about creating diversity. It's not about rebellion. It's a state of mind that is constantly looking beyond the status quo, and therefore it's constantly evolving, and it's up to each one of us to define it. A central aim of my first practice, Foreign Office Architects, was to harness exteriority and the gaze of the outsider to form a different view on architectural problems. And it made a deliberate attempt at not developing any form of specialization and to remain agile and to embrace different kinds of architectural problems. In the early 1990s, the problems and opportunities we were facing were very different. The Yokohama Port Terminal, which Kate very kindly elaborated on, was an experiment using parametric tools before parametric design before having parametric tools, but it was aimed at taking a ferry terminal that is usually empty because cruise ships don't arrive there or moor there every day, and to design it as a public space that could be open to anyone in the city or visiting the city. It was 48,000 square meters. It was our first project in a country we were strangers in. It didn't help that I was the wife in the partnership, but being an outsider allowed us to challenge the expected, ask questions that others perhaps wouldn't have asked, and therefore have the ability to be creative. I'm proud to report that it has been open since 2002, and it has become a very popular destination. There are over 2 million non-traveling visitors to the building, so it is fully used constantly. It has increased the local economy, and it has spearheaded the regeneration of a whole strip along the Yokohama waterfront. At FMA, which is my second practice, we continue the aim of not developing any form of specialization and working on different architectural problems. Not being a specialist helps us to look at problems slightly differently, and it also allows us to look for cross-fertilization between projects. MoCA Cleveland, the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland, is a project that I started at FOA and then it moved with me to FMA. While starting to work on the project, it was our first museum project, we relied on our experience of Tate Modern, where the paying of tickets to exhibitions is handled at the door of each exhibition, making the rest of the museum open to anyone, and therefore Tate Modern has become a very inclusive destination. Now, our strategy of a multi-story massing for MoCA Cleveland was a response to its triangular site, but we proposed to put the Pate Gallery on the top floor so that the 3 levels below would be free of charge and open to a broader audience. Now, when working on the flagship store for Victoria Beckham here in London, we drew on our experience of MoCA Cleveland, where we had to address create a flexible home for art. Now, at the Victoria Beckham store, the shelving for displays is designed to be retractable so that you can change the number of displays, but more importantly, you can retract them into the wall and use the space in front for events. The hanging garment system comprises chains that are housed within tracks in the ceiling. They can be easily moved around or put completely away so that the entire store can be again used for events. Now, this display system generates a sense of unpredictability that I think is closer to a gallery than a store, and this is relevant at a time when experiencing retail in physical space should be different to online. Now, my focus has also been on housing, which has been said is the most urgent problem of our time. In truth, it's also one of the oldest problems of our time. A long history exists for almost every single concern that we have today in the context of housing, whether it is to do with providing people with choice or user empowerment, whether it is to do with well-being in the context of housing, a sense of community, or working from home. For example, when we talk about working from home, we need to remind ourselves that we used to work at home in the 1900s, prior to the building of the model housing and also town planning ideas that paved the way for separation between work, leisure, and living. And therefore, it also eliminated the kind of the family economy model, and we started relying on the male going out to work as a chief earner. Now, the gender argument for bringing back dual use of homes is surely clear. Each apartment in the residential block that we've designed in Nanterre has 2 terraces. Now, Florence and her husband, living in the block, are both teacher researchers. Florence tells us, and I will quote her now, during the lockdown, my husband and I had to organize ourselves to give our classes, but what was great was to have 2 terraces. I have given classes from this terrace. I have had some fears at first, but it went very well. In fact, I have been giving classes from my terrace ever since. It is remarkable how profound small-scale architectural decisions can be in people's daily lives. The question in the context of working from home, of course, remains, how can we make this a more inclusive subject? After all, not all work can be done from the space standards of the modern apartment or its configuration. And housing is also a question of social equality too, which is partly to do with freedom of expression and how we express people's lifestyles. Today, it is quite easy to label social housing, the ones on the left, as there is a cookie-cutter approach of expressing it in solid blocks of render or brick punctuated with windows. In our affordable housing projects, such as the Montpellier project you see on the right, we have questioned this. But this aesthetic shift is also connected with the agenda of providing the occupants with a choice of balconies, which vary in height, in shape, orientation, views, and privacy, to afford them with freedom of expression. Recently, Jean-Pierre, who lives in the building, told us that because the building's architecture is distinctive, he feels that the whole building is his and not just the apartment that he lives in. He says that this is a feeling that all the residents share, so the architecture has become a bond between the residents. In other words, the originality of the architecture has created a sense of community because through it, people feel connected to one another. Constantly shifting focus between practice and research-led teaching has been a way for me to ensure that our work stays relevant in these changing times. Who would have thought COVID-19 would come along? And look how much it has changed life in such a short amount of time. We have so much to unlearn and so much to undo. Life outside practice has been a bit of a juggling act too. When I started practicing in the 90s, teaching at the AA alongside starting to run a practice was not easy. I thought I had just about learned to juggle the two when I was expecting my daughter, Mina, while doing the largest and most challenging project of my entire career to date. During the same time, I begged the surgeon to discharge me from hospital early so that I would go and present the South Bank Center competition, which we won, by the way. Then later, it was canceled. In the unfolding excitement that followed the announcement of that result, I did interviews with the phone in one hand and Mina in the other. It was, of course, my own decision to subvert the norm of taking time off work after having a baby. The parents in the room might agree with me on this, that my child has been my biggest project, and I never saw it as choosing one project over the other. And soon I was getting instructions like this from Mina for her 10th birthday, telling me she wants a cake with Hello Kitty wearing a t-shirt with number 10 on it, knee-high jeans, an Australian outback hat, little shoes carrying a snake with lots of reptiles on the ground. I delivered it. Life proved to be even more unpredictable when I faced divorce, becoming a single mother, and the task of setting up my new practice in the midst of the last recession. The price you pay in this approach of remaining agile and refusing to define yourself is that it reduces opportunities that come your way, especially in the construction industry, where they are fearful when you do not walk or talk like the rest of the people they see. In my personal life, I've had to forego many friends and dinner invitations, which are essential in today's networking culture, because teaching and practice writing have kept me occupied and engaged with less mental bandwidth for other things. But I believe that to continue to learn, whether it is myself, my daughter, or my practice, it is important to forego the idea of balance and remain open to change. Anybody who said architecture is about balance, you never know if the competition you've been working on for 6 months will stick with you, and you never know whether the project that you are passionately working on or you've been passionately working on for several years will eventually get built. Whether it is the nature of architecture itself or the approach of becoming a woman, it hasn't been easy for me to articulate my career and practice. So receiving this award provides me with let's say, will to continue and to look forward rather than back. I am sure that I will continue to evolve, and the work of my practice will too, and that it is this agility that will help me and help us architects to face the new challenges that we face in the coming years. Thank you.